Can you imagine being locked inside your house for your whole life? Caroline's aunt and uncle said she was so ugly that she had to be hidden from the world. If anyone saw her, she'd be taken to the church and burned at the stake. But things are not as they seem. One day, Caroline started asking questions. She wanted to know why the other kids could play outside, but she could only sit and look out from her bedroom window. This made her aunt and uncle very angry. They said, "Can't you see yourself? Don't you understand the sacrifices we've had to make to keep you hidden from the world?" She had been convinced that staying trapped was for her own good, but one day she decided to escape. She used a safety pin to unlock the door and left. However, soon after she made it out, two men wearing uniforms started shouting at her. She began running. When she turned a corner, she saw a group of people who pointed at her and screamed, "Monster." Eventually, a priest came and said, "Take her to the church." They dragged Caroline to the church, put her on an altar, and set her on fire. As the fire grew, the priest turned to the crowd and said, "Look at this monster. Look at her hands, only 5 fingers. Look at her face, only 2 eyes, and her teeth a sickening white." What would you do if this happened to you? Once a young woman named Claudia was about to walk home when it started raining heavily. Not wanting to be rained on, she decided she should get a taxi instead. As she walked down the empty streets past the cemetery, a taxi approached her. She got in and quickly realized something was wrong. She began feeling unusually cold and noticed the windows were covered in ice. Then things got even weirder. Claudia realized that they were going the wrong way. She blurted out to the driver, "We're going the wrong way," but got no response. She raised her hand to tap him on the shoulder and the driver looked back. Claudia let out a scream. She couldn't believe what she saw. The driver's face was withered and pale, his skin clinging tightly to his bones. Claudia began to panic. She tried to open the door and jump out, but nothing worked. She even banged on the windows to try to get passers-by's attention, but nobody heard her. Then, in a fit of desperation, Claudia began to scratch at the driver to make him stop driving. His withered face came off into her hand, revealing a gleaming white skull beneath. Claudia and that taxi was never seen again. This is why you should always sit in the back seat. Vivian was spending a year in Korea when something terrifying happened. One night she was going out with her 2 roommates who spoke Korean, and at the end of the night they decided to get a taxi home. Vivian sat in the front and her 2 roommates sat in the back. This would be her first mistake. The driver spoke really good English and began telling jokes. Vivian found them really funny, but soon realized that her roommates weren't laughing. In fact, they had a strange expression on their faces. Vivian said what's wrong, but they wouldn't answer. Suddenly, one of her roommates said something to the driver in Korean, and he pulled over on the side of the road. Vivian knew something was wrong. They weren't anywhere near their apartment, but her roommates got out of the taxi and started walking away quickly. Vivian paid the driver, then got out to follow them. And that's when she found out the truth. Her roommate said, "Did you hear it? It was coming from the trunk of the taxi. A woman's voice saying, 'Help me, help me.'" If you ever lose your phone, don't do what she did. One day, Sophia came home late from work and realized she didn't have her phone with her. Thinking she must have lost it, she decided to call herself from her home phone, not knowing this would lead to something terrifying. The phone rang for a long time, then someone picked it up. What a relief, Sophia thought to herself. I must have dropped it and a kind stranger found it. "Hello," Sophia said, but the person on the other end didn't reply. "Can you hear me?" Sophia said again. But all she heard was someone heavily breathing on the other end. Then whoever picked up the phone finally said in a low voice, "I hear you." Then they hung up. Things only get weirder from here because Sophia kept calling, desperate to find her phone. But after getting no response for a while, she gave up and decided to get ready for bed. And this is when everything went wrong. As she walked upstairs to her bedroom, what she saw terrified her. On her nightstand was her phone, and it was on silent. This is why you should always keep a diary. Once there was a young woman in Korea who was blind in one eye. She decided that once she saved up enough, she would get a cornea transplant. Eventually she did, so she scheduled the surgery. She was very excited for it. However, afterwards, things took a terrifying turn. She stopped texting and talking to her friends and even her family with no explanation. People thought she just needed some time to recover. However, eventually her parents grew worried about her and went to her house. They knocked on her door, but there was no reply. Then they called the police, who broke down the door. Inside the house, they found the young woman lying in a pool of her own blood. Her parents were devastated. No one could understand why she did this to herself. Perhaps it was just a social isolation. However, this theory was quickly changed when the police kept investigating. All the mirrors had been smashed in the house, as well as all other reflective surfaces. But it wasn't until they found the young woman's diary that they really found out what was happening. When they flipped open her diary, they found that on the last few pages she'd written over and over again, "My right eye is staring at me." Can you solve this mystery? This is the story of a family that witnessed a horrible accident, but things are not as they seem. And all the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So this family was taking the bus across the country to visit some relatives, but halfway through the trip, the 2 kids started complaining to their parents that they were hungry. The parents then requested the bus to pull over near a roadside diner and got off the bus one by one. But inside the diner, they saw something that terrified them. On the TV, they saw a news report of an accident nearby. A bus had been crushed by falling rocks and everyone on board had passed away. This was the same bus that they were just on. The wife then said, "I wish we had never gotten off that bus." The husband looked shocked. "How could you say that?" But then he thought about it for a second and said, "Oh, I see, you're right. We shouldn't have gotten off that bus. Why did they say this? Can you solve this mystery?" If you ever hear someone whistling, don't do what she did. Once a girl moved to Peru with her dad, who started a new job as an English teacher. But one night something strange happened. She looked out the window and saw a long dark shadow moving through the trees. Then as the shadow approached her bedroom window, she heard a whistling sound. Not thinking much of it, she began whistling back to it. Her father came to check on her and found her daughter still facing the windows, whistling to something unknown. He asked, "What are you doing?" And she replied, "Whistling at the dark figure in the trees." And as soon as the father looked outside, he took his daughter and locked her in the closet. Then he broke the key in the lock and locked the windows. And from the inside of the closet, the girl could hear her father saying prayers, but all of a sudden it stopped. Then she heard a scream. The bedroom windows shattered and she heard her father's screams fade into the distance. The next morning, the girl was found by villagers investigating the damage to the house. Her father was never found, and eventually she was adopted by her aunt and uncle. Years later, she still sleeps inside a locked closet, in fear that the dark creature that once whistled to her would someday return for her.
So this couple comes in together to buy an engagement ring, and they had a budget of about $20,000, which is a lot for an engagement ring. But the ring that she happened to pick out was about $35,000, which is a lot of money. And she was really adamant about picking it, and he was kind of reserved, like, it is a lot of money. But she's like, "No, if you love me, you'll buy it, yada, yada, yada." And he's like, "You know what? You're going to be my wife, the mother of my kids, whatever makes you happy." So after they finally decide, I pack it up for them. I'm like, "Here you go. Have a great marriage. Have a great life. Goodbye." About 3 weeks later, the fiance comes in, and I'm thinking she just wants to get the ring size or something. And she's like, "Can you guys take out the diamond and replace it with a cubic zirconium?" Cubic zirconium is a very cheap substitute for a diamond. So I was like, yeah, we can do that, but just give us 2 or 3 days. So she leaves, and I call her fiance because I was like, "Oh, this is really suspicious." And he had no idea that she came into the shop or that she was coming in. So he calls me 2 days later, and he finds out that she was going to break up with him. She would have kept that diamond, and she would have given him the fake one. He would have returned it, and he would have gotten no money.
This is why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who was on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mail, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower. I'll call you back." And she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police, who quickly arrive, and they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you."
Was this a case of badly behaved children or something else? One morning, I was with my mum in the bathroom of our house while she was getting ready. She was acting a little distant, so I asked her if everything was okay, and she told me about something that had happened the night before. At about 2 a.m, she had been woken up by a strange noise, so she got up and went to see where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the bathroom, and as she walked in, she saw a hairdryer plugged in and turned on in the middle of the floor. She thought it was strange, but that it was probably just one of the kids, and went back to bed. About an hour later, she was woken up again by the same sound, but this time when she went to check, it was coming from downstairs. Once again, the hairdryer was in the middle of the floor, but this time in the downstairs bathroom. As she's telling me this story, I turn to look at the closet in her bathroom, and as I do, the entire light bulb smashes into pieces.
If you can solve this riddle, first try, you may just be a genius. All of the clues are hidden in what I'm about to say. 2 girls were born to the same mother, on the same day, at the same time, in the same month, and in the same year. However, they were not twins. How is this possible? Let me know in the comments section if you can solve this mystery, and if you can, send it to a friend.
So I used to really like this guy who said, and I quote, "The only thing I'm into are nice bodies." And I didn't have a very nice body at the time. But I worked really hard and I got one, and I went to go show it off to him. And then he started screaming and saying things like, "Get away from me, you're a murderer. How did you carry this human being all by yourself?" And as he was doing what some might call escaping, he turned to me and he said, "This is the last time you're going to see me. What do you have to say for yourself?" And I looked at him and I said, "Do you remember that you said bodies plural?" Because I don't think you're going to like what